And the webinar's live.
Thank you very much. Hello and welcome to Cheshire CCG Governing Body meeting for October. My name is Andrew Wilson. I'll ask colleagues to introduce themselves as they first speak, although their names are helpfully on the screen. Do we have any apologies, Christine? I don't. If there's silence, I take silence as we don't, because I don't believe we have. We know that the accountable officer will join us late. But oh no, she's arrived. Thank you. Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So a few thoughts, as we often have at the start of a governing body meeting, and it does seem to be a theme of our CCG that we have lived in extraordinary times and continue to do so. Very mindful that COVID cases are once again on the increase, and the pressure on the health services is once again, unfortunately, rising, and we're seeing that in our hospitals with increased hospital admissions, and they're nowhere near what they were back in waves 1 and wave 2, but still having a significant impact upon our hospital colleagues and how hospitals are working. And I speaking to a chief executive the other day who was saying that 30% of their ITU beds are being taken up by COVID patients. That's not insignificant, and I think that's something that we should remind ourselves of throughout this meeting. Perhaps also the pressure on our community staff. Of course, you could say that this is now a community wave of COVID and having to be dealt with largely in the community, because fortunately vaccination has made hospital admission less likely. It's probably right for us to remind people that we are not helpless against this virus. Hand, space, face, ventilation and vaccination all work. We know they work. We've done it before, and we are not helpless against it. It is not inevitable that we have high circulating rates of COVID, and so I would remind everybody that those things can be done to decrease transmission and complications associated with getting COVID. So that, I think, hopefully is a focus for us for the meeting, that the services, both health and care in particular, are under significant pressure, and we can't get out of that without support for our workforce, and that is something that will come up later in our discussions. But I want to mention something in particular, which is the primary care workforce, because there's been continuing pressure from media and from elsewhere on GP services and how they should be changed. And I think it's our opportunity. Let's be honest. I think there are patients who are finding it difficult to access GP services, but we have to be honest as to why that is the case. And it isn't because GPs have decided to operate in a different way. They have decided to operate in a different way in order to prevent spread throughout a pandemic, but it's because there has been insufficient investment and insufficient workforce planning in general practice and community for a number of years, and we are seeing that coming through now, exacerbated by COVID-19. And so, as a membership organisation, I think it's right that we take a second to say thank you to our colleagues in general practice who are working hard and delivering for their patients, and to remind everybody that that care that they provide is greatly appreciated by their patients and by the public at large, despite some of the difficulties that people are having. I think what people are providing is still very much appreciated. So that is a background for us for our meeting. Let's move on with our business. So that takes us to the minutes of our previous meeting, which was held on the 16th of September. And is there anything anybody wishes to comment on from those minutes? I remind colleagues that if they want to speak, if they can type into the chat box, or if it requires a quick response, pop your hand up and I hope that I see it. So the minutes start on page 3 of your pack. I don't believe anybody has anything to correct on the minutes, in which case we'll take those as a true recording of our discussion. Is there anything anybody wishes to raise from those minutes? No, thank you. Brilliant. And we are in the envious position of having completed all of our actions, so there is no action log to consider. So that moves on to public questions. I don't believe there is a public question as such, but Mr. Gus Cairns has asked for a statement for us to listen to, which I'm going to read out. And I know that Mr. Cairns did want to give us this statement in person, and I declined that on the basis that we don't have a public speaking section in our meeting. Is submitted questions. But on reflection and having discussions with Matthew, I think that's something that we should consider for future meetings, or perhaps for future meetings of our place meetings, as we will discuss later. We're intending to set up place meetings, and they will be with local authority colleagues who are, of course, very used to having public speaking sections in their public meetings. So perhaps that is something that we will consider for the future, which I think Mr. Cairns has precipitated. But Mr. Cairns' comment relates to an item in the AO's report regarding the Autism Hub, and reads: the West Cheshire Autism Hub is committed to being a proactive provider, working with the Council and the NHS to achieve the ambition set out in the strategy, and we look forward to radically reshaping and improving the local services and support available across our borough to autistic adults. I'm sure that's something we'll all welcome and all be in agreement with. Is there anybody who wishes to particularly respond to that? It may well be picked up later because it is in the meeting later on. Lovely. Okay, thank you. That takes us through to the chair's report, which is item 3.1 in your pack. I'm in the strange position of not having much to report to you, because I think everything that I'm doing at present is basically the agenda of the meeting. And so Claire and I have continued to have multiple discussions with partners across both East and West Cheshire regarding place arrangements and place partnership working, and how our CCG work is devolved and into place. Claire may say more about that later. We've continued to have discussions around how, and I've been involved with the course of the Joint Committee and the setting of the Joint Committee. We've had an extraordinary governing body meeting in common with our colleagues, which was an informal meeting to discuss the way forward in terms of greater delegation to the Joint Committee, and we've agreed to meet again in November, where we will have a proposal put to us potentially for approval about delegation of the authority of the governing body largely to that Joint Committee, to allow a transition between CCGs and the into the ICB, which is proposed in the new the bill, which is could become an act, presently going through Parliament. I continue to meet with chairs of our organisations across Cheshire and with member practices who, as we've already discussed, are under great pressure at present. I'll pause and see if anybody has any questions regarding Chair's report. Fiona.
Apologies, I don't seem to be able to work the chat. Is this a time for you as the chair to comment on?
Fiona, you're very quiet. Can you go closer to your microphone, or is it?
That's unusual, isn't it? Can you hear me any better now?
That's better. Thank you. Yes, it is. Yeah.
So I just wondered, as the chair, is this a time to mention briefly any feedback from the membership meetings? I was a bit concerned from the West membership myself as a GP, that I hadn't realised the difficulties some of the GPs in the West were having with results and the Centra system, and I was concerned that if I didn't know, the rest of the governing body didn't know, and there's a big risk. I appreciate that it's been looked at by other people, but I just wanted the governing body to know of the risk that is involved in patient care if there is a difficulty accessing results and knowing which results to access and getting other people's results, etc., etc.
I think it is important that we discuss that. Absolutely, I think it's important feedback from West membership. I was intending that might be raised, or expecting that might be raised in the quality item in terms of the Cerner transfer. That's okay. Anybody have anything else to raise? Lovely, thank you very much. So that is simply for noting. And then item 3.2, which is our accountable officers report, which is on page 13 of your pack. So Claire, please.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, Claire Watson, Accountable Officer. So apologies, I was a little bit late. I've had a meeting first thing with Cheshire West Place and Cheshire and Mersey Integrated Care System Interim Chief Officer and Interim Chair, which went very well, outlining proposals for the future, really, which build very much on our discussions last month around changes in governance. And I know there's a paper later on about that, but I think it's just positive to hear that the meeting went well, and I think plans for the future in place are positive, and I think that we're in a good place. So usual update report covers a number of items which aren't covered elsewhere in the governing body papers. I'm not going to go through every single item, but obviously myself and all my colleagues from the exec team and others will be able to answer questions on all of it. I'm just going to pick up a few points. So I couldn't not discuss COVID, and obviously we have the increasing infection rates across the country, but obviously across Cheshire. So it is about keeping safe, as we heard at the beginning, in terms of all the sort of protection for ourselves. But we have the booster programme is up and running. The scheme for healthy 12 to 15-year-olds in school, and obviously the evergreen offer for residents who haven't yet had their vaccinations. So really good work going on as ever. Obviously it's still a level 3 major incident, so we just need to take account of that in some of our actions, and obviously this is managed through the CCG's COVID committee in terms of assurance back through the governing bodies through the AA report. The long COVID services that we commissioned and the funding approved by governing body last month start by the end of the month. That's really positive in terms of the population who've been affected longer term with COVID. You can see in item 3 around winter planning, and I'd like to thank Neil and the team in particular all the work that's been done around winter planning. So we've signed off the Cheshire East and Cheshire West plans, and I think having 2 place plans sort of moves us forward in terms of our units of planning and delivery in the future. But they were discussed and supported at the A&E Delivery Board earlier this month, and they've been submitted to NHS England. And I know yesterday there were meetings between our regulators and our providers to look at just about delivery and preparation for winter. Items 4 and 5 are 2 really important joint strategies with Cheshire West and Chester local authority. We've heard that Gus Kearns asked about the autism programme, so I've got one in LD and or autism and one around the Children's Trust and the SEND strategy. So 2 really important strategies for our most vulnerable population. They've been reviewed and endorsed by the exec team. I'm just going to take you on, there's a policy there from CHC, which again has been supported by the exec team. You can see, I think it's really good to congratulate staff on section 8 in terms of some of the success we're having in terms of awards. There's some national awards that we've been successful in, and we've been shortlisted for an HSJ award for the communication engagement around the COVID insight work that we've been doing. So I think that's really, really positive. So congratulations and thank you to all of those involved in that. Andrew talked about in his update just all the work that's going on around Cheshire and Mersey integrated care system. So you can see in section 9 there's a core narrative there which outlines exactly what the ICS integrated care system is. But there are so many meetings going on at the moment in terms of preparing for transition and change, and I'll talk about that in the following paper. But also, as Andrew said, in terms of the joint committee, we've got transition board, we've got all the work around the place committees. So there's an awful lot of work going on with various sort of subgroups across various functions of the CCG and the ICS, but really positive progress being made. And I think thank you to the interim chief officer, Sheena Comiskey, as we know as the chief executive of CWP, who is sort of coordinating and moving that agenda on whilst we wait for the substantive appointment of the chief exec of Cheshire and Mersey ICS. The interviews for that post are on Monday. stakeholder panel earlier this week, and so hopefully we'll hear early to mid-November on who has been successful in the appointment to that chief executive post. And thereafter there'll be a whole raft of further work as we move towards a new organisation in April. Just wanted to talk through the workforce, because obviously at any time workforce are our sort of key asset, but obviously it's really important at the moment as we're going through change that we're really cognizant of and aware of all the pressures they are under. There's a paper later on that Chris Morris and Matthew have written in terms of our staff wellbeing, which also includes the Workforce Race Equality Standards Action Plan. But I think it's just important at the governing body to look at these figures in terms of our workforce. I wanted to raise today in terms of, obviously you can see as ever, unfortunately, that a day's lost in terms of sickness. The highest sort of group is around stress, anxiety and depression. We're doing an awful lot of work around wellbeing, resilience and change through our OD prospectus. We're also doing work on culture and wider issues to support staff in the here and now, but also as part of that transition for the future. So I wanted to raise that. You can see at the bottom, we've got the decisions from the executive made within delegated authority from the governing body and within the accountable officers, SFIs. And I think importantly, in line with our changing governance, which the governing body signed off last month. So you can see in section 12 there, decisions made under the executive's authority with all the caveats around delegated authority from governing body and within SFIs. So happy to take any questions on anything within the paper. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you very much. I think, Gwyd, you do have a question, and if you raise it now, if we decide it's better dealt with later on, we'll deal with it later on, but if you raise it now, we can make a decision.
Thanks, Andy. Gwyd and Rees, Governing Body GP. Thanks, Claire. It was just a question on section 3.2, which is on the winter planning and the A&E delivery board. You know, so I appreciate everyone's working as hard as they can. It's not meant in a critical way at all, but personal experience in practice suggests that, you know, a number of different parts of the system are creaking at the moment. And it's asking really, how do we feel about the responsiveness and the resilience of what we have in place? Are we utilising all our assets that we have at our disposal to try and manage that greater challenge over the next few months? Thanks.
Thanks, Gwydion. I hope we are. I think as Cheshire, we work in partnership across all groups, sort of statutory and non-statutory. And I think that's where the A&E Delivery Board has come into its own recently, in terms of discussing on a place basis, but also the opportunities where one size helps in terms of that work across the two places. We recognise the pressures in workforce across all sectors of the health and care system in terms of domiciliary care, social care, pressures in our providers and mental health, and obviously in general practice. Those discussions are front and centre, and that's one of our key risks at the A&E Delivery Board. In terms of all of the schemes that we've identified to support winter. And we talk about winter, but really it's seasonal planning, but obviously nationally there's the winter planning, and that's our greatest risk, and we recognise that. So that's why working in partnership and looking to be as creative as possible, looking at how we can use the third sector, the independent sector, not just in terms of sort of acute independent sector, but all the wider partners and all the wider sort of providers in our community to support as much as we can. I think one of the key points, we have a detailed communication and engagement plan around winter, which will bring both the national programme in, but also reflect our local work, and particularly working with Health Watch, who are out and about at the moment. It's about how we work with our population in terms of self-care, encouraging the population to look after themselves where appropriate, because recognising absolutely, as you said, Gwydion, the pressures on our providers and on, you know, the whole of the NHS and the wider care system, but doing what we can with our plans, trying to be as creative as possible, and obviously trying to move people through the system as safely as possible so they can be at home where appropriate with the appropriate care.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Neil. I'm just going to give Claire the opportunity to correct her opening on that. I'm not actually correct, clarify. You said, I hope. I hope isn't good. I think, are you confident that we are?
Sorry, I don't think I
started off your answer to Gwydian's question with, I hope that we are. I was just reflecting that, and Gwydian's question was, are we using all our assets to meet the challenge, essentially?
Oh, see.
I think it was a turn
yes.
of phrase that you used, which was,
Okay.
I hope that we are. But I was wondering whether you wanted to go beyond hope to something which is closer to reassurance, if not assurance.
Okay. Yes, we are.
Thank you. Lovely. Neil.
Yeah, sorry, just to add on to what Claire was saying, I think we know that workforce is our single biggest challenge and constraint this year in terms of availability in all sectors, and what that is meaning is some of our traditional approaches to responding to winter are having to be slightly different this year, and you'll note some of the areas of focus within the governing body papers listed. Just to say that, you know, we have mentioned in there that as we speak, we are in the unusual position of we're planning for the second half of the year while nearly at the end of the first month of the second half of the year. So we recognise we haven't yet brought back to governing body the detail of the winter plan or the financial approach to funding that winter plan. And some of that is driven by the fact we're working through that financial planning process at the same time we're doing winter planning. So that will come shortly. The other thing that will be helpful is, whilst, as Claire said, we submitted a key lines of inquiry response to the winter plan at the end of September, and we've drafted Cheshire West and Cheshire East plans. We recognise they're both quite lengthy and detailed, and they continue to iterate even after sign-off. For example, last week we received a national letter around primary care access with £250 million nationally available to invest in general practice access, and we are, as we speak, I've got people frantically working away talking to general practice about how we might best utilise that opportunity, which is a great opportunity, but clearly equally a challenge in relation to the workforce constraints we've already touched on. But we are planning in the next week or so to summarise the winter plans into easy read versions, which might be more palatable for many of us in terms of a summary view of what's in the winter plan, so people get an easy way of seeing it rather than reading 50 to 60 pages of very detailed information, which we'll share with you virtually rather than wait for an upcoming meeting, just so you can come back with any questions you might have to link to Gwydian's question earlier.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments on our AO's report, please? Okay, nothing else in the chat box. So thank you for that, and thank you for your report, Claire. We are simply asked to note the report, which I'm sure that we're happy to do. Before we move to the next item, you've all been very kind in not pointing out to me that I missed out declarations of interest, and we go back to declarations of interest. So opportunity for you to declare any interest. Of course, you all have a declaration on our website about your conflicts of interest, but if anything particularly you wish to highlight, whilst you're considering that, I will say that we are all, to a degree, conflicted in a number of the items today which concern the future and the disestablishment of CCGs, the movement onto new structures, because of course we are all at risk to some degree in that process. I don't think we can mitigate that because we are the governing body and we wouldn't have to make decisions if we all left. And we can only mitigate it by reminding ourselves of our obligations under the Nolan principles on a number of things, but in particular to make selfless, objective decisions, which I'm sure we will all continue to do. Nobody has wished to raise anything that from a declaration of interest point of view, so I'll take it that nobody has anything, and we'll move forward to our business items, which is section 4 and section 4.1, which is the NHS CCG due diligence, close down and transition, which I think Claire is going to lead, I believe with the assistance of Diane, but I'm not 100% sure if Diana's with us. So I'll hand over to Claire and we'll see if Diana's with us. So Claire.
Thank you, Andrew. Diane and I spoke yesterday about this. So I don't think she's going to be attending today.
Okay.
I think we can cover it off in terms of CCG's role in and work across Cheshire and Merseyside as well as locally. I think, you know, to a future date perhaps Diane may attend, but I don't think it was necessary today. So this paper outlines the systems the CCG has in place to safely manage the close down CCG and transition of SAT staff and property to Cheshire and Merseyside Integrated Care Board. So you can see we've set up a group which is very much akin to the work and the programme we did when we merged the 4 into 1. So you can see here we've got a transition group which in figure 1, it sets out all the governance around that, which I think provides hopefully assurance to the governing body that we are on track with this in terms of our processes, covering all the different functions. So we've got all the due diligence in place, got membership across the whole organisation that reports into the Cheshire and Mersey Transition Single Point of Contact Group. It also dovetails the work that's going on across Cheshire and Merseyside with the Cheshire and Merseyside Transition Programme, which the governance of which and the sort of is in Appendix 1. Obviously, there are interdependencies between our local group and the Cheshire and Merseyside group, and I think that's the sort of the key contact in the transition, the spot coordination group, and obviously via myself as the accountable officer sitting on the transition board. So hopefully this gives you assurance that we have the right structures and committee group, the group locally. I think it's really helpful, and thank you, Peter, that we have a governing body lay member as part of that group, as we did when we had the programme to merge 4 CCGs into 1. So obviously Peter can provide challenge and also assurance to the governing body from a lay perspective that we have the process in train really. So the group set up, working through all the due diligence and working very closely with Cheshire and Merseyside. So that's what I was going to say today, Andrew. We'll bring back highlight reports to future governing body meetings, but I just wanted to today provide assurance that we have a group in place. It's managing that transition in line with all the due diligence work we have to do, and it's absolutely consistent with what other CCGs are doing across Cheshire and Merseyside, and it feeds into the Cheshire and Merseyside Transition Group. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam, I think you have a question to raise.
Yes, hello, I'm Pam Smith. I'm a lay member for engagement, involvement and experience. I was just going to ask about the membership of the transition groups and the subgroups. When we did this last time, we had lay members on those subgroups, and I'd be quite happy to work on some of those if you feel that's appropriate.
That would be great. Thank you, Pam. You're right. We did, and I think that would be a really helpful addition to provide sort of greater assurance, but also that sort of check and challenge to make sure we're particularly around the engagement piece, that we're sort of reaching out to the wider population on this. So thank you. That would be great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think we were all allocated a group, and that's how it worked last time. I can't remember, but there was a lay member on each of the groups, I think.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on that item? This is clearly going to be something which is important to the governing body / place committees as the world moves forward, and I think a discussion about what information assurance governing bodies or place committees require on this will be helpful. So people have thoughts on that, they can perhaps share those with me, and I think we should discuss it at the CCD chairs committee as well in terms of what would be appropriate to make sure that we have a handle on all of this. Lovely, thank you very much. We are asked to note that work to support the due diligence and close down and transition requirements. and I'm sure that we can do that unless somebody tells me they feel they cannot. Lovely. I think we can move on then to section 4.2, which is establishing the governance arrangements for the remainder of 2021-2022. Matthew, this is a governance loving meeting. What can you tell us?
It's taken me 9 years, but we eventually got there, Andrew, to make you all love governance. So you've all talked about a lot of the content of this paper already, which just demonstrates just how important it is on the agenda at this moment in time. So today's paper is just really giving you an update on what you received at the September meetings and previous meetings. I don't intend necessarily to go through it line by line, and hopefully the summary that we've been able to provide you in table 1 on page 37 of your pack does highlight the key things that we've been able to progress since we last met in September, but also recognise, I think Claire sort of articulated this before, just how many things are currently happening at the same time, which directly influences what we're trying to do, be it as a governing body, be it at place, or as joint committee of Cheshire CCGs as part of the establishment of the Cheshire Merseyside Integrated Care Board. So there are a number of areas highlighted within there in terms of showing how that kind of parallel piece of work will influence and allow us to finalise what goes where in terms of our sort of CCG place committees, as well as the joint committee of Cheshire and Merseyside. I'd just like to highlight really in the paper, so in terms of paragraph 1.4, which is on page 35, we've just given you an update since the last governing body where we have engaged with our GP memberships via our 2 sort of place meetings, where we gave our GP members a real update on the proposals that the governing body approved, as well as what has been progressed around the joint committee. At both the East and the West GP meetings, I believe we got the support to progress with our recommendations about establishing the place committees, but also to give that sort of authority to the governing body to oversee the changes that will inevitably happen over the next few weeks and months. Very clear though, of course, that governing body and the GPs on the governing body always have that kind of authority to say we need to refer certain things back to the membership, which was well received. We also highlighted where the GP and primary care voice is really loud and present in these emerging forums. So the voice of primary care isn't going to be lost as we progress. You've highlighted before, Andrew and Claire, around the governing body meeting in common to talk about delegated authority to the joint committee. So that's still a work in progress, and as you said, we're looking to arrange another governing body meeting in common in November to receive the sort of final proposals around what will be delegated up to the joint committee. Many of you are on that call, and obviously we'll inform you when that next meeting will take place as well. 1.7 also on page 35 highlights that the governance leads across all of the Cheshire Merseyside CCGs and the integrated care system are meeting on a regular basis, once or twice a week now, to work through some of the transition stuff, but also what we need to do around close down. We've taken away some of the actions from the governing body meeting in common and the feedback that each governing body is given in terms of what they need to see. And you'll be seeing those proposals coming soon, including timelines for the establishment of subcommittees, as well as all the things you've asked for. Even just during this meeting, I'm seeing numerous things coming up saying this is what has happened this morning. So you'll see real progress on that as well. As I said, hopefully you'll see in table 1, that's on page 37 of your pack, and table 2, which is on page 41 of your pack, the progress and some of the key next steps. I think it's important to note on page 40, I've highlighted what we've currently agreed are the meetings that are going to be at place or joint committee or primary care or governing body. But equally recognise we always have the ability to establish, all the meeting dates if required because of the business. So whilst that's written in the paper, that doesn't mean we don't have flexibility to meet, the evolving landscape around decisions. Other than that, Andy, I'm just asking really the governing body to note the work undertaken, and I just really want to again use the opportunity to thank all the team, you know, in the governance directorate as well as other directorates for the work that's going on. And it is a challenging time, but we're meeting this and using the experience that we gained from our merger. And you know, we're heavily influencing a lot of the work that's going on at Cheshire, Merseyside, and place as well. I'll leave it at that, Andy, if that's okay.
That is lovely, thank you. I'm going to go to Peter in a second. Before we do, just point out there is a small error in the paper, isn't it, on page 35 on paragraph 1.4, where it talks about the governing body seeking the approval of the governing body, and it should say GP membership. So it's just if people have noticed that. Peter.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Wilson. My name is Peter Monday. I'm one of the lay members for governance. On page 40, we've got a schedule of committee meetings, which doesn't include governance, audit and risk. I wonder if we could adapt the table to show that.
Absolutely. What we want, Peter, in time is to be able to show all the different committees that will take place. But yes, governance and audit.
Yeah, so that needs to be within that table, definitely. But and following on from that, when we discussed this in the past, I think there was a feeling that some residual elements of the Finance Committee would pass into GARC, Governance, Audit and Risk Committee. I don't believe that's the case now, but I wondered if you perhaps talking to your colleagues across other CCGs, whether you've got any further clarification on that, because if as planned, there's a Finance and Resources Committee at joint committee level, in other words, right across Cheshire and Merseyside, then clearly that falls away. But I think we do need to discuss that as a governing body as to whether there is any finance left at committee level.
So, Peter, I'll give an answer to that. I'm sure colleagues might want to come in on that one as well. So, again, this is my point earlier before about the parallel going on around the joint committee and when their subcommittees will be established in the timeline versus we've still got the business to carry on now as individual CCGs and the timelines for that. So in many respects, because we were having this conversation around place a little bit earlier and talking about the disestablishment of our committees, in some respects, we might have been slightly further ahead in giving a timeline of when we would need to disestablish or transfer responsibilities. That is obviously now being influenced heavily by, as you quite rightly said, the establishment of a Finance and Resource Committee across Cheshire and Merseyside. And I think probably the indicative timeline for that establishment in its first meeting is going to be early December. So there will probably still be a need for a Cheshire Finance Committee in that interim period. But again, as part of those conversations across the 9 CCGs and internally, you're absolutely right. What elements might still need to be retained at place versus what goes up to that Cheshire Merseyside sort of subcommittee as well. So I haven't got a hard and fast answer for you, but again, I think that just reflects that it's really a moving beast, whole feast really, in terms of where what goes going forward. But I think that's probably what we can feedback at the future meetings in terms of, is it definitely now going into our Governance and Audit Committee, or is everything now going to be into that Cheshire Merseyside ward, and then what are the reporting arrangements back down to place or CCG level, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Peter looks content. I'm just going to point out that Pam has made a comment that on table on page 40, the Primary Care Committee date seems to be incorrect and clashes and should be the 24th of March. So just a point of accuracy to note, I think. And then Fiona, do you want to come in and voice your question, please?
Yeah, so Dr. Fiona McGregor-Smith, GP, representative from Northwich. When I was looking at the tables, the place committees are going to be in place fairly quickly. And so I just wondered at what point they will get any sort of financial autonomy, decision-making ability, and for what and to whom they would be accountable.
So again, I'll answer that, but I'll equally defer to my colleagues. You might want to add to that. So at our last discussion, we did say, sorry, at our September meeting, is that once we've established the place committees, they in effect have that authority to make decisions. However, we did say it's decisions when that's already agreed in terms of the financial budget or the financial plan of the CCG. And if sort of decisions were being asked that would take us out of that, we would need to refer back to the governing body who holds the accountability to it. So I'm summarising that because I'm sure there might be a more technical answer to that, but the two place committees are still acting within the financial budgetary constraint of the CCG, so they need to be mindful of that as well. Again, I'm sure Linda might wish to add to that in terms of how we're trying to work through the finances at place, if that makes sense, and the split. But when we do receive papers at place, we need to be really clear, absolutely, where there's a financial commitment and what that means to the CCG as the accountable entity.
And I will ask Linda to speak in 1 second. I think there's the other aspect to it is we are doing this difficult juggling act, which is delegation to two places as well as delegation to the joint committee. And if you think if we were, like the other CCGs in Cheshire and Mersey were, coterminous with our place, and we were considering giving our delegations to the joint committee, we would essentially be saying our governing body doesn't need to meet very often because there aren't many decisions to be made, and because if we delegated it to the joint committee. So we're doing it sort of down to place, which I think is really important because it allows a certain way of working to be established and start to work. But actually, the authority from a CCG point of view goes there may not be as high as we might have thought at one point, because actually it probably is going to be at the joint committee. I don't think that is of any great consequence, because it will still work, and I think it's still important that we have the place committees, but it is something for us to consider. Linda, on the point of financial authority of the place, do you want to make a comment?
So there are a couple of really significant things in terms of budget setting and budget environment, and which are still maintained at the governing body level, which are not delegated either upwards or downwards into place or the joint committee. And so we will need to keep an eye on that as we go to ensure that we're making decisions at the right place, if you pardon the word place, because we just need to be aware of that. There are some significant things that the governing body still has to do.
Thank you very much. That's a warning to colleagues that you might well be asked, I've been clear and said, asked to come to governing body meetings as well as place meetings, and for some of you as well as joint committee meetings for Cheshire and Mersey. So I'm afraid if you thought it was going to be quite an easy time, it isn't. Claire?
No, I think it was just to say, if it's not clear, we can, Fiona, we can make it absolutely explicit in the terms of reference of the place committees, CCG place committees, in terms of that financial delegation authority and how it works, up and down to sort of CCG governing body. So if we need to do that, we'll make it explicit. But I think I just wanted to build on Andrew's point. I mean, there are, and I said in the AO update, there are a lot of meetings at the moment. There's a lot of business going on, and probably for Cheshire more so than other CCG in places, because obviously we went from 4 to 1, and then we're having to sort of disentangle ourselves to establish the CCG place committees as a forerunner for any future place committees from the 1st of April. So recognise the enormous amount of work that's gone on, and thank you very much to everyone who's been involved in that. And I suppose just begging people's forgiveness in advance and patience as we work through this, and as Andrew says, as you are asked to attend numerous meetings on behalf of the governing body, but obviously paramount, it's on behalf of the population of Cheshire in terms of the outcomes and the sort of conversations we'll be having in these meetings. So I think it's really important that when we all sit on these committees, we are there sort of advocating for the population of Cheshire as much as anything else. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any more questions regarding that, so we can move on then, and we're moving on to item 4. Sorry, we're simply asked to note that item. So note the update and developing position around governance, which I'm sure we will all be content to do. So let's move to section 4.3, which is the committee close down report Firstly, the Strategic Commissioning Committee. It's on page 42 of your pack, so I can hand over these to Wendy.
Wendy Williams, lay member. This has been brought to governing body previously, but this is the final representation of this closed down paper for your comment and approval. As part of the work that's been going on, as we've just been listening to, this one has been scrutinised in detail. And the activities of the Strategic Commissioning Committee, which of course is not, it is actually a discretionary committee, not a statutory committee of the CCG. The work has now been allocated into different areas that would be coming up between now and next April. It was agreed by the executive that there were no immediate issues that were pressing for the Strategic Commissioning Committee to be working on between now and then, and that they could quite adequately be handled elsewhere. So this is the final paper being brought. The other two issues that were outstanding, which you will see at the end of the paper on the action list, have now been allocated. So the IAPT has been allocated elsewhere and will be dealt with. So there was no need to bring it back to the committee, hence the reason to not have any further committees. So the governing body is being asked to agree and note that they're content with this shutdown.
Lovely, Wendy. Just to clarify, are you saying there are no outstanding items now for the committee at all?
Nothing at all. The committee has now stopped meeting.
Lovely, thank you. So we're asked then to note the report, and we were asked to consider the appropriate treatment and transfer of the outstanding issues, but I think Wendy's telling us now there are no outstanding issues and those have been dealt with. Claire.
Thank you. Thanks, Wendy. I think, just for clarity, I don't think it was just the exec team that decided that the committee wasn't required to continue. I think that was a decision that we made body when we were discussing future committee structures. So I just want for clarity for that. It was a governing body decision around which committees continued and which ones didn't. Thank you.
Yes, if I just come back on that one, I think it was the issues for discussion where the committee actually did look at in detail following the decision. So it was just to say that there were no outstanding things that the committee needed to deal with. That was the point of it, but thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Wendy.
Lovely, thank you very much. So we asked to note the report. We were asked to consider the outstanding issues, but there aren't any, which I think then just leaves us, I think Peter has just put a note in the chat, which is very timely, to thank the committee for its work. I think it's fair to say that what we envisaged and our ambitions for the Strategic Commissioning Committee never quite got where we all wanted them to be, given that we had COVID and then disestablishment of the CCGs. But despite that, the committee did significant and important work over its time. So thank you to Wendy and for everybody that sat on that committee for the work that's been done over that time period. Right, let's get to 4.4, which is the committee closed down report, quality, safeguarding and performance, page 53 of your pack. And Christine, I think, is going to lead us for us. Christine.
Thank you, Chair. Chris Morris. I'm the registered nurse. So as Wendy's explained, with her committee, Quality, Safeguarding and Performance Committee had their last meeting in October. This paper was considered at that committee meeting, and that was the last meeting as a subgroup of the governing body. Moving forward, the agenda of the committee will continue to be fully considered by a group which will function very much in the same way to ensure that appropriate assurances, risks and mitigations are reported upwards to place committees and new governance structures going forward. I've reported that I'm confident that the committee has met its delegated responsibilities, and particularly over this continued COVID times when quality, safeguarding and performance, have potential to be challenged across the whole system with different practices and ways of working in place. I'm confident that the committee has done everything they can to ensure, you know, that the safest care that could possibly be delivered to our residents. I'd like to thank all the participants and members of the committee for their active engagement. We've had very long meetings and very in-depth discussions relating to the three focuses of our attention: quality, safeguarding and performance. And I know that that work will continue with the new group going forward. So I'd like you to accept the report, the closed down report, please.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments regarding that report? Fiona.
So Fiona McGregor-Smith again. So thank you very much, and I think the committee has obviously done a lot of good work in making sure quality, etc., is scrutinised and looked at. I just wasn't quite clear, but maybe I didn't read the paper properly, where that scrutiny is going to take place going forward.
So all of the papers as they currently stand will go to a group, an assurance group. So it won't be a delegated subcommittee, but it will be a group that functions very much in the way that we have done previously. And then the report that we would normally bring to governing body here will go to place committees for scrutiny and oversight in those forums going forward.
And will that have, this is kind of a general question, I suppose, to everybody, and will that have the same clout as you have had up to now? Because I think that's really important.
Well, it's really important that we make sure it does. I think that's in our hands, really.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point, Fiona. None of us want to have any chance of falling down on continuity of local knowledge and intelligence around quality, safeguarding and performance, do we? Paula, let's come in.
Thank you. It's just Paula Webb, Director of Quality, Patient Experience and Safeguarding. Just to answer Fiona's point, as regards the committee, nobody who's a current member of the committee is currently said that they want to stand down from being a member of the group. So, you know, we have lots of people there who are really enthusiastic, reading the really detailed papers that come and ask, you know, great challenging questions actually, which, you know, will lead to us often going to seek some more assurance and thinking differently. So the plan is for us to continue presenting the same papers at the same level of detail. I guess your point then is about what we then take and escalate to the place committees and ensuring that the place committees then apply the same level of rigour that we would have got if you actually talk about it being a committee. So I think it sits with our responsibility really to make sure that both and continue to do the work that the committee did and also the governing body.
Lovely, thank you very much. Look, we are asked to once again to note that report, which I think we'll be happy to do. And once again, I'll extend our collective thanks to all of those involved in that committee, although you have all committed to continue to do the work. Well, thank you for the work you've done in the present format, and I look forward to receiving it in its future formats, which will be reporting potentially into the governing body, but probably more predominantly into either place or into Cheshire and Mersey structures. So thank you very much for that. And that moves us on to our next item, which is the People's Plan and Wellbeing Update, which I think is item 4.5, and I've got Matthew down to open. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. So Matthew Cunningham, Director of Governance and Corporate Development. Want to do a bit of a double act with Christine on this one, if that's okay. So if I just focus on the update around progress around the People Plan and some of the wellbeing stuff that we're doing, and then if I can bring in Christine to talk about the Wellbeing Guardian sort of update as well, I'd appreciate that, Andy. So I'll be quick and brief. Hopefully you have received some assurance that there's been a tremendous amount of work ongoing in the CCG around the People Plan and the many actions that came out of that, much of which were influenced by the events of COVID and our response to that. But I would also like to highlight that, you know, equally, as thorough as the report is, it can't truly capture the amount of work that goes on at a CCG level and individual level to try and encourage wellbeing amongst our staff during this challenging time, and whilst most staff are still working from home. But hopefully you'll get to see there's been a fair bit of progress since you last received an update last year. What I will highlight is I've not included today the CCG's RES action plan, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, we needed to do a little bit more engagement with our staff and our sort of equality group within the CCG. But we also need to really look and focus on what it is that we can achieve as a CCG in the remaining 5 months, as well as what we need to align to in the emerging Cheshire Merseyside system as well as what our partners do. So that still is a bit of work that's ongoing, and it will come back to you as a governing body. But an update on that progress was given to the last quality committee as well, which I'm sure Christine can touch on as well in terms of where we're progressing. What you would have seen at the last governing body in September in the Accountable Officer report is our RES report, our Workforce Race Equality Standard report, that highlighted what we've got to submit to NHS England. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things that hopefully you picked out of the report in terms of some of the things that we've progressed. So as a CCG, for the first time, you know, we produced a health and wellbeing policy, which has been implemented across the 9 CCGs as well. And we've also implemented wellbeing conversations, which was one of the key sort of asks of the people plan to ensure that both new starters and existing staff not just have one-to-ones on personal development conversations, they do have conversations about what will support them in their well-being. But this is still a relatively new and emerging sort of process, and there is various guidance, and I'm sure you know, a wellbeing conversation will mean one thing to one person compared to another. So we're still working through how that's been implemented and how people are finding that useful. But we have given staff and managers guidance and training around those wellbeing conversations as well. Also, you know, we've updated the policies that we've needed to update, which has an impact on staff wellbeing, such as you know, flexible leave and sort of agile working side of things as well, and that all helps with people's well-being. We're also continuing to do sort of time to check-in surveys just to make sure that we are understanding how our staff are coping and feeling at this moment in time, and then from the actions that come from that, we're trying to address them again with more either educational opportunities or signposting to both local and national offers around support, of which there is many. Again, I probably just want to finish off because I'm sure that the benefit would come from questions really. Just to thank people like Karen Shorrocks and our support from Midlands and Lancashire CSU and the HR team, who are doing a tremendous amount of work to help our staff access support, but also, you know, contribute to what they think we need as a CCG to live our values and behaviours. So I'll leave it at that for me for now. Is it okay, Andy, if I bring Christine in to talk about the Wellbeing Guardian update and then receive questions after that?
It is, thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. So, you know, I really note the greater emphasis on staff wellbeing that is being shown by the CCG towards its people of late, and the inclusion of this information at board level. Throughout my really long career in the NHS, we've really focused on monitoring sickness absence rates and, you know, meeting the national target of 5%. And Claire and I attended a Wellbeing Guardians Network meeting in September, where the people plan is changing that focus and asking us to sign up to change that focus from counting those people who are off sick to supporting the 95% of staff who continue to work through what's particularly been a challenging time. And we had in that presentation, you know, evidence that you know, staff that are well supported in their workplace are far more productive and give better patient care, which is really well evidenced academically. So what NHS England has asked all trusts to do is to sign up to basically changing that focus. So continuing to support the 5% who are absent from work, but shifting our emphasis to supporting the 95% of people who are in their work, and recognising that we can actually do more to do that. So they've asked all organisations to sign up to the pledge, which is detailed in the paper, and for boards to have oversight and really to drive that change within their organisations. I think a lot of it in the meeting was very focused on trusts, hospital trusts, and I think, you know, Claire, Matthew and I's aim is to constantly push. You know, there are staff in other parts of the NHS that need the same level of focus, particularly in CCGs as we go through a transition. So we'll continue to push forward, you know, that requirement. But I'm asking really for you to sign up to the pledge, to encourage then for our teams to develop an action plan on how we can do this by the end of December, which is the national timeline, and for us then to have an ongoing process of monitoring how we are supporting our workforce. And for me, I think the most important thing is about how do we know we're doing it well. So the survey checks and wellbeing checks that Matthew's talked about, really important mechanisms for us to know that that this work is having an impact on all of us, whether we're in primary care, whether we're in CCGs or in hospital trusts, that it is actually making a difference to us. So I would urge you to support the pledge, so that I can then go back to NHS England and say Cheshire CCG has endorsed this, and recognising that, you know, we will transition to a new organisation, but this is a national plan. So whatever we agree to today will go forward into new structures. I like to recognise, as Matthew has already, the significant work that's been done to move this forward, and I know it is making a difference from conversations that I've had with individual staff members. So thank you for the plans that are now visible, Matthew and team, for the work that you've been doing.
Thanks very much, Chris. Claire, I think you wanted to add to that. Do you want to come in?
Yes, just very briefly. Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, Chris and Christine and Matthew. So it is really important, and Christine and I on the webinar, it was very much trust focused. But as we move towards the integrated care system as a successor organisation for the 9 CCGs in Cheshire and Merseyside, talking about an organisation with over 1,200 staff. So I think it's really important that even in our sort of in the last few months of Cheshire CCG, we do this as part of our legacy and part of what the new organisation is going to inherit, and we can lead by example and lead from the front. You know, from pre-merger to all the way through our life as a CCG, we have focused and championed sort of organisational and personal development, and I think there are a lot of the programmes and work that we have done that we can take into Cheshire and Merseyside, and I think that's really important. You know, we've been doing temperature checks on staff for all the way through COVID, and had a real focus on, as Matthew has said, on well-being and all the sort of the relationships, and continuing to work with and speak to our staff on a regular basis. Those temperature checks are now being sort of adopted by Cheshire and Merseyside, so we'll see something new coming out, but on a greater sort of footprint. A lot of lessons built from us. Obviously, we're taking part in the staff survey, and as I said in the AO report, you know, we have a really comprehensive organisational development offer, which we are sort of updating and adapting on a regular basis to take account of feedback from staff, and primarily focused on the next few months on well-being, on resilience, on change. And I think it's really important that we continue that work right through to the very end of the CCG life and into the new organisation. So I'm really delighted to see this paper here. There is a lot of work going on in the background that we don't see in terms of sort of commissioning, but actually it's the well-being of the staff who lead that work. You know, we couldn't deliver for the population of Cheshire if the staff who do the work weren't well and weren't engaged or didn't feel part of the organisation. So I think it's absolutely fundamental to how we are as an organisation, and absolutely it's key to how we live and breathe our values. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just a quick point of clarification. You said when you said temperature check, you didn't mean like this, did you? You meant some form of wellbeing temperature check?
Yes,
just,
thank you.
You mentioned COVID in the same sentence.
Not a you know, how hot or cold you. Well, I suppose it is how hot and cold you are in terms of how staff are feeling about themselves, the organisation, what support they're getting. But no, not physical temperature.
I was going to make a comment about primary care, but I'm confident that my colleagues might. So let's bring in Fiona,
so
and then we'll
thank you for that clarification, Andrew. Yes.
Pleasure. Just I had the prop to hand. So, Fiona.
So this is I welcome the emphasis actually on the people who are there at work, because an observation as a GP, I often have people in my surgery, nothing to do with health, who the healthcare system, who are struggling because their colleagues, for whatever their job is, are off sick for whatever reason and are expected to absorb their level of work, and so and that has enormous impact on their physical and mental health. And so I think it is really positive if we are, and more than just surveys, if we are actively asking people who are absorbing their colleagues' work, you know, after a day or two, how are you managing? Can you cope? What do we not need to do? Because people will step up, but there's only so high they can step a lot of the time. So I think it's a very good emphasis on the people who are still here, and I think that's but we also need a very slick way of checking that's still okay.
Thank you very much. Peter?
Oh, yeah, Peter Munn, lay member for governance. I'm going to be asking a question that perhaps I should be in a position to answer, but the staff are all transitioning to the ICB, not to place as such. And as such, I was going to ask, on the close down and transition checklist, do we have these itemised? So do we have the wellbeing guardian, the whistleblowing guardian, fraud champion? Are these all sections within the checklist that where we know what's happening to their body of work? Because there could be cases, there could be files to transfer over to the new person at ICB level.
Yes, there'll be. Yes. So yeah.
Yeah, we are. Okay.
Short answer is yes.
Lovely. Thank you. And then if I can bring Leslie, have a comment.
Yeah, it was just it's great to see that we have a focus on wellbeing and sort of staff. I was just thinking whether we were looking beyond that to our sort of PCNs and communities and the staff within the NHS and how we're measuring their kind of wellbeing at the moment, and I suppose how we're supporting those organisations to help their staff moving forwards. That was just my sort of comment, I suppose, a question as well.
Can everybody respond to that, Claire?
If I start, I'm sure others will come in. I mean, the other statutory organisations, Leslie, will have their own sort of systems working. Will be, particularly NHS, will be adopting some of the things outlined in the report. Because obviously, it's an NHS people plan. All of such NHS organisations have requirements. They'll have teams and functions, as will other of our local authority and other partners. I think it's a good challenge or question around general practice. We have offered out a number of our programmes within the OD prospectus to our primary care networks and our practices through the ICPs. So there's an opportunity to attend some of the programmes that we've got in the OD prospectus. But in terms of the wider wellbeing, I think that would be managed on a practice basis. But obviously, you've got the support of the LMC for general practice and the wider sort of occupational health scheme as well, I think, for general practice. But it's something that maybe we need to look at as part of the burgeoning primary care general practice confederation, and what wider support we can give to general practice at the moment. I don't know if any GP colleagues want to comment on that.
Not Dr. McCallum.
He's got his hand up. Andy McCallum's got his hand up. Andrew.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Claire. I mean, I agree. I think it's a moment, isn't it, Leslie, that we really need to think, certainly within general practice. So, sorry, I'm Andy McCallum. I'm one of the joint medical directors of Cheshire CCG. I'm also a GP in Great Sutton. And it is a point, I think, that we need to think about. If we're specifically at this point, as Claire mentioned, talking about general practice, it is where the reorganisation does support general practice coming together more. And I think certainly some of the discussions at membership over the last couple of weeks have supported that move about strengthening federations and strengthening the structure of general practice. And hopefully with that will come that type of support that comes with it, because you've got an infrastructure around it then that can support it. So I applaud the strengthening of general practice, frankly, and I think that understanding of its workforce and its needs will come with that.
Thank you, Dr. McCalvey. I think Matthew wants to come in as well in response to that.
Yeah, just so I suppose I'll echo a little bit what Claire said in terms of some of these things aren't looked in the same scale as maybe some of the organisations like the trusts are as well. But in conversations with sort of the meetings with all the Cheshire HR directors, there is a recognition that, you know, we need to do this once, you know, where there's a wellbeing offer, how can we do it once rather than 4 trusts doing it individually? And the conversation had been, how do we encapsulate and incorporate primary care colleagues into that who, you know, might not have the level of access and support. So it's been talked about, but I generally think it has to be equally something that at place we need to discuss as much as that sort of provider collaboratives. So you get that support at scale rather than 72 practices going off individually. Not saying you do that, but it's something there. But it does need to be given equal importance, because it's the well-being of the workforce in totality, isn't it? Not just your individual organisation. So some assurance that the conversations are happening, but I think more work absolutely needs to be done, and the primary care voice needs to be raised, and equally understanding where NHS England, who also have some responsibility around this for primary care, play into the local conversations as well.
Lovely, thank you very much. So we are asked to note the progress against the action plans that have been taken, seek any further clarity, which I think we have the opportunity to do, and support the pledge to commit to shifting the wellbeing focus from 5 to 95%. I think, Christine, you did point out that, of course, it's a slightly unfortunate phrasing. Perhaps it should be 5% to 100%, because it does sort of imply that we're no longer focusing on people who are off sick, which I think is unfortunate but not intended. So can we sign it saying 5 to 100%? Probably not, but I think it is a very unfortunate phrasing, isn't it? I think we know what's meant by it. So are we content with that and signing the pledge? We are, thank you very much. That moves us on to item 4.6, which is the emergency preparedness, resilience and response submission. Matthew, I know you are always brief and succinct. Could you be particularly brief and succinct on this, please? Thank you.
I'll be very brief and succinct if you wish, because equally this is another massive thing that impacts on people's well-being in many ways, both from a really big. So I just, if I can start off with some thanks, please, because this is a tremendous undertaking that happens every year. So big thanks to Phil Meekin, who's the Deputy Director of Governance and Corporate Development, and Gavin Rage within our Directorate, who support a lot of work. I'd also like to give a lot of thanks to the EPR working group, for which Suzanne sits on, and thanks for her support in that, and the Governance and Audit Committee, who helped to oversee the processes. You know, we have to do this as an organisation, not just individuals. Hopefully you've had a chance to read the report, which is very robust and outlines, you know, what you received at the September governing body in terms of what I had to submit as the accountable emergency officer for that time around our initial self-assessment, but also the steps that have taken place since that to look at our submission to NHS England, which, as you remember, the Governance and Audit Committee agreed that's what the emergency workforce group, sorry, the working group could do as well. So I think that the key highlight is, those submissions are going in. We're seeking your support around our submission around our self-assessment of full compliance against the core standards, which we've been asked to provide evidence against this year. You will see in the paper that there are less core standards we have to respond to as per previous years in recognition of, how we've been over the last 18 months. But I'd still like to, commend really the staff across the CCG that's allowed us to put a full compliance submission in. What I would say is what we've experienced over the last 18 months, both with COVID, both with flooding, and all the various possibly biblical things that seem to happen sometimes. We've got quite a robust system in place in Cheshire, and the work we are doing with our partners, both at the local authority level and the primary care and a trust, has been tremendous over this last year, which really I think is the purpose of our emergency planning approach on that one. So I'll quite happily open to any questions if anyone's got any about what we've provided you today. And as I said, I'd like you to note the work, but also approve really our sort of final submission around full compliance as well. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much. Can I bring Ian, please? Think you have a comment?
Thank you. I just wanted to really echo some of the things that Matthew said. There was a couple of exercises that were held, I think last week actually. There were joint exercises with partners and the system and lessons learned, in particular around some of the flood work as well. And I think it's really, we're living through a major incident still, as Accountable Officer said earlier, and we have other major incidents that happen throughout Cheshire as well. And it's really important that we plan properly, we respond well, we reflect on what could have gone better, and I think that's a really good piece of work that the teams have done there. So just really to echo that joint work that we do on emergency plan.
Thank you for that, Ian. Absolutely, these things really matter when they really matter, as a resident of Cheshire will tell us. So I'm intending to move on unless it was something which is of burning importance, because we're slightly behind time. Claire, was it of burning importance?
It wasn't burning importance, no. It was just to thank colleagues from the local authority, actually, local authorities. I think the work we've done collectively, particularly during on the sort of the COVID, has been testament to partnership working, and I think it's been really good that CCG has been invited in to those fora and those meetings in terms of SCG, SRCG, and the whole sort of EPRR sort of hierarchy. So it's just to sort of thank colleagues Ian and Matt in particular for all the work they've been leading on over the past sort of 12-18 months, but also the recognition that partners have for the NHS, and it's been great to be part of those conversations at a bigger footprint, and I think hopefully the value that CCG has been able to add to those wider discussions, particularly at a sub-regional level. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, no, we'll never dismiss collaborative working as anything other than burning importance. Thank you for that. And if we move on to our recommendations then, which are to note the statement and to approve the self-assessment as fully compliant for 21-22. I'm looking to foresee some form of agreement. I'm certainly not seeing any disagreement. So we will take that as agreed. Thank you. That moves us on to the committee governance reporting, section 5, 5.1, the report of the Quality, Safeguarding and Performance Committee, which I believe is starting with our committee chair, Christine. And I will just bring in the reminder that Fiona raised earlier. It probably will come up in questions, but there is the question of the Cerner transfer for the counties of Chester, which we'll want to raise and discuss. So, Christine.
Thanks, Chair. I think Paula and Neil are going to pick up the detail in here, so I'll hand over to my colleagues.
Hi, I'll start if that's okay, Chair. So two points to highlight for me in the report. The report said obviously it's a template of the summary of matters which were discussed at the committee. Firstly, is to follow on from a point that Neil raised earlier in the meeting linked to workforce. All sectors are describing challenges in relation to workforce alongside the current demands at primary care and secondary care and community services alongside the independent sector. And just to say that normal recourse, for example, to temporary staffing solutions is also equally challenged. There are no easy solutions to this. So, you know, agencies and bank setups that would normally be used are also reporting similar challenges. A number of our providers have been engaged for some time in using international recruitment and workforce, and have had some great outcomes in terms of achieving numbers of staff. But all of our providers are reporting that even with additional recruitment that they've gone over establishment, that there are challenges. And the second point that I'd like to highlight was the discussion that we had about a new patient administration system at the Cheshire Hospital, and the impact particularly on primary care was the area that we had the discussion on, which speaks to the point that Fiona raised early and committee had asked that we raise this today. We've got Dr. Andy McCallum here with us today, who's been our lead director on this, who will be able to talk to the work that continues to happen on a daily basis in terms of trying to resolve some of those issues. But just to say that a big thank you to our practices who are providing information to us on a daily basis about areas where they identify potential risk, and we continue to share that information on a daily basis and track it in terms of risk to patients with the trust, and we will continue to work on that, and that is an area of priority for my team. But in terms of the solutions and the work that's ongoing, then Andy McCallum will be able to speak to that.
Andy, are you? Can you give us an update on that?
Yeah, thanks very much, Andy. I think there's no doubt that the Council of Chester needed to implement the patient administration system, and I think there's been some questions about the timing of that. Well, the decision made on that was several years ago. The previous system they were using was pretty awful for clinicians and administrators in the hospital. So we need to support them, and certainly speaking on the majority of clinicians, certainly I've spoke to, it absolutely is going to be a really good system and one that's going to improve patient care. So I think we need some confidence in the actual in that decision. I think we've struggled with really is that process and the implementation and the impact it's had on primary care, which was it's unforeseen, I think. But lessons have been learned, and I think what's improved from this is actually some of the shared working that we've done. So it's taken clinical leadership, and we've got that across the piece now, certainly from the CCG supporting some of these moves. It's had a big impact on primary care and general practice. But crucially, what Paula said is that the practice engagement has been crucial. So it's really important to see from the end user perspective what's been happening. And just to summarize, some of the blood test reports that were coming through were absent. So we think we've got a fix on that now. Some of the reports that were provided to general practice were erroneous in that a lot of the reports were stated abnormal. We've got a fix on that now too. So there's still issues when it comes to timeliness of letters. There's still issues regarding format. But what the CCG and clinical leads have done is actually prioritize some of the safety issues, and that's been key in actually managing this. So in interest of time, I can answer questions, Andy, but I think we have got clinical leadership, we've got practice engagement, we've got a good grip and oversight of the delivery now of the program. And very key really is the regular communications that we need to provide and make that clear of where we're up to. It's been a clear task given to the Council of Chester, but to work with the CCG on developing those clear communications, which have gone predominantly really to the practice managers, but also need to actually get to clinicians as well, who actually have got to try and manage this. I think there are some challenges still in the next few weeks. Certainly one is the legacy of managing some of the results that are still within the system that need to be delivered to primary care. And we've asked that question to practices last time at GP memberships. And I think the majority of practices that actually have reported back to us is, give us the results. Let's deal with the results. There will be a large amount of work to be done in primary care. But actually quite a lot of those, it's the duplication which is the issue. So we need to actually work out a safe system of actually delivering those results as well to primary care. but we've got lots of clinical support and clinical leadership to support that process too, and liaising with general practice is key. But also this develops opportunities as well for service improvement. So this isn't the end once things settle down. I think we need to build on the relationships and some of the structures that we've created to improve some of the ongoing communication issues that we've got. And frankly, lessons need to be learned, because I think there may be implications for other organisations who want to adopt modern patient administration systems. And so we need to be really up to date on some of our lessons here.
Thank you, Andy. I know Fiona wants to come in. Fiona, do you want to come in?
So thank you very much. And I really wanted the governing body to be aware of this issue because I hadn't realised just how severely it was affecting primary care. And so I was slightly confused. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that Council of Chester didn't realise it was an issue, but I don't know if as an acute hospital trust they actually realised what a huge impact it was having. First of all, on what we've just been talking about in the last section about well-being and staff morale, and it was creating a lot of extra work, but also stress because of the results that were either missing or difficult to find, or the wrong results, or not getting the letters in a timely fashion. It has been creating a lot of stress across the primary care members, GPs and their staff alike, because they actually care about doing the right thing for the patients, and it was making it very difficult to do that, and the patients at an individual level were at great risk, and that was what was being highlighted at the last meeting. So I'm really keen that governing body understood that. The second thing that I wanted just people to slightly understand is because I am concerned that going forward there will be individuals who have been put at danger and may have been not treated in a timely manner, or things have been missed, and I really would like governing body to show a huge degree of support to those individual GPs or GP practices where errors have been made through all of this this problem that has happened, because individual patients will then complain about their individual practices or GPs, and I feel that there would be inherent unfairness on that. And the third thing that I wanted to raise, Andy's already said it, is that the idea is that this will be going forward to other hospitals, probably not least mid-Cheshire, and so we absolutely must make sure that whatever it was that caused this problem and is causing the problem is completely resolved before we allow it to be sort of put out to other hospitals. We cannot allow this to happen again. And those are the 3 points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to bring in some comments that have been put up. So Dr. Gwydion-Rees is in agreement with what Fiona has said. And we've had a question, is this on the risk register? And it is on the risk register with a score of 15, which is under review. So I have a general question. It's probably to Andy and the exec team more widely, which is: are we clearly there are issues here which you've mentioned in terms of patient safety, in terms of workload, which I think in a system as we presently have, which is there is no spare capacity, where we've already spoken about workforce, where you have tired, exhausted staff, that itself becomes a safety issue if you then load more onto those staff. Are we confident that we are doing, that the Countess is doing everything that can be done to ensure that this is resolved as quickly as possible? Taking into mind, Andy, that you have said that some of these issues, the most significant ones, are now fixed, which is great. But is there anything more that needs to be done? Anything that we need to be insisting on, or any conversations we need to be having? Is there any funding we need to be releasing? Whatever it is, there anything that needs to be done on this item? So
don't underestimate the amount of interrogation we've put into this as well. I don't think it's, there's an approach, isn't there, when you come to a safety issue like this, but actually you still need to have good, positive working relationships. But the interrogation on trying to understand what the root causes of this are still ongoing. And so I've asked the question to the most senior people, certainly the most senior medical people within the organisation, to try and understand is there any more support that you need? Talking about expert external IT support, for example, they are sourcing that. So they're sourcing that now. They're also sourcing any other regional IT expertise, and we've offered that to them as well to actually say, you know, and Kevin Highfield, who has our head of IT, has been instrumental as well in actually offering that. I've been attending the meetings now in the last 3 weeks, and the offer is always there. So I think they are sourcing that. They're encouraged by that. I'd say that there's been implementation of this system, but elsewhere as well. But this package was a different package. There will be lessons learned about the implementation, the training requirements that are needed, and actually the impact on primary care. There is obviously some anger within primary care, and I completely understand that, absolutely. It's actually replicated internally though, and certainly there's some real pressure within the trust itself, but they've got a system of governance, a comprehensive system of governance within the organisation to try and tackle some of these issues, to actually minimise obviously patient safety, the impact that may have on patient safety. But is there anything else we can do? Well, the offer is always there, Andy. We're certainly supporting any type of expertise that can actually bring this problem to some solution. We are creating some solutions. We've got daily input from primary care and secondary care now to actually get some of the cross system issues. And as I said to some of the senior clinical leads, this is a system issue. It's not a Countess issue, it's a system issue, and we need system solutions.
Thank you very much. Can I go back just to check? So that's an important issue. Clearly, it was raised by membership. It sounds like you know, an awful lot of work has been going on. I think thank you to those in the CCG and the trusts who've been working on this. It's clearly been difficult, but it is absolutely imperative that we get it right as quickly as possible, whatever those workarounds are, whatever the IT solutions are, to make sure that patients are safe. Can I go back to Paula and Christine in terms of ensuring that there's anything else to cover off in terms of the quality performance? Neil has got his hand up, so I think Neil wants to come in.
Yeah, just to add, building on what Paula was saying about some of the wider discussions we had, we went into some detail last month at governing body and talked about the pressure that the whole system was under, with the interdependencies between those pressures across the different sectors, from primary care through to specialist services. It's probably useful to highlight in the meeting, we do get into quite some detail in relation to very specific issues. So we know that, for example, across a few of our providers, we've got specific challenges around some of our cancer 2-week wait pathways, and work's going on to try and support the providers and identify where mutual aid could come from across providers to cope with both capacity shortfalls where people may have left an organisation, linked to increased volumes of referrals that might be coming in at a particular point in time to those providers. The challenge we're often finding is it's the same pathways across providers that are causing the challenge, which makes the mutual aid more complex. But we're working hard on that, and also looking at any opportunities around things like independent sector support. As we speak, the planning for the second half of the year is happening nationally, and within that process, it also looks at some of these real challenges, and providers are being asked to highlight the challenges to try and develop an ICS response to some of those capacity and demand imbalances that we have within our provider system.
Thank you. I know, Fiona, you've asked to speak. Was it on this item? In which case, please come in now before I go back to Christine to check that we have covered off everything in the quality and performance arena. Fiona.
So the question was, I can't remember which section it is now, but it was about the nursing homes. And obviously nationally, I'm aware that they are raising an issue about insufficient staff. And also I know locally that because there is a national directive now that I think by a certain date in November, if the nursing home staff must be double vaccinated, and there are a small but still significant number of those staff who have declined vaccinations, which means that they won't be able to work in nursing homes. I just wondered, was that impacting on our ability to make sure that the rest of the health flow could happen if there's going to be a decreased number of nursing home beds? And was there, if the reason that that nursing homes won't be able to accommodate quite so many patients, especially if they're coming out of hospitals, is because of decreased staff, because of disinclination to have the vaccines? Is there anything we can be doing to support that?
So Paula, you've got her.
So each care home is working with local authorities to submit through a capacity tracker and through daily dialogue the numbers of staff who have yet to be double vaccinated, who won't be double jabbed by the end date. So there is an awareness by home, each home, of the number of staff that won't achieve that requirement. Then each home is in a situation where they then have to identify their business continuity plans for dealing with them. And actually, for some homes, there is no issue. There is full compliance, and for some homes, it's a small number. And then for a very small number of providers, there is a risk in terms of the fact that they will then need to access agency staff. And for those homes, they are looking to book agency staff. I think the challenge comes from the point I raised earlier, is that agencies are equally challenged as well in terms of having adequate staff. But it is being tracked at an absolute micro level, Fiona, in terms of understanding the impact. I spoke to the director in both East and West last week and again this week to seek that assurance and to think about business continuity. And in fact, I spoke to Ian Ashworth about it yesterday because the spreadsheet goes into very significant detail. And what we're all looking for is, I take your point about business continuity around flow and system, but also as well, this is people's homes. And for people that are currently residing there, there's something about continuity of care, and we the staff that work in that sector are so committed and so diligent to providing high standards of care that I actually think it's both current residents as well as flow that are equally important. But there is a lot of eyes on this, and I guess there's probably a concern maybe about a small number of providers where people are querying business continuity plans. And the other thing is to say that the data has been provided as well at a national level. So actually sometimes some of our providers belong to large groups. So it's actually about understanding the business continuity plan of the whole group as opposed to just our local provision as well. And we've also got, I know, primary care continuing to link with care homes and to make sure that some of those discussions are had where people need some more confidence and more information around vaccines. And then the final thing that's happened is the information has come out from the centre around the vaccine exemption process, some clarity about which staff fit into that group. And I understand as well now that in terms of the data returns, that exemption list will be added to the information the care homes can provide, and we may find that some of those staff who have yet to be jabbed now fit in the exemption category, and a number of those homes will have staff on long-term sick, for example, or on maternity leave, and actually will be some of those numbers.
Thank you very much. Really important question and answer. Sinead, I know that you've come in. Paul has given a very comprehensive answer. Is there anything to add? And if so, can you be brief?
I'll be really quick, yes. Just to say we do, as Paula said, we work really closely with Cheshire East and Cheshire West local authority colleagues. We have regular meetings with them. We've done a number of webinars and focus groups to try and understand what those care homes staff's concerns are, and we want to continue to support that dialogue because there may be staff who maybe could still change their mind about being vaccinated with extra support or having their questions answered. So we have been doing that and we will continue to do that. So I just wanted to assure everyone around even staff who haven't been vaccinated already, there's still an opportunity. They might have to step away from client-facing work for a while, but there's still an opportunity for them to get vaccinated and for us to work with them on their concerns. So thanks, Andy.
Thank you. As I said, very important stuff. I'm going to come back to Christine to check that we have covered off everything. We will probably both look towards Paula and Neil to see whether that's true, but Yeah, you think you have. Lovely, thank you very much. So we are asked to note the particular items the committee wish to bring to the attention, which is section 2 of the report, and note the items listed in section 4 of the report. And I think we've given that good airtime and have done that, so thank you. And that moves us on to 5.2, which is report of the Finance Committee. And again, coming to the committee chair, which is Suzanne, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points to highlight on page 118, section 3. The committee is focused on the mental health spend. So monies have been given to CWP. They've submitted a plan for their proposed development, and I believe the team are working actively to help them procure with third parties to spend that money. So we're keeping a watch on that. The other key thing at the moment is H2, which is the second 6 months of the year to 31st of March 22. The finance team are busy planning away and preparing an interim budget, which Linda will talk about, pending more information from NHS England. And the other thing is just policies. I think the key one to pull out is the car lease policy. The numbers have dwindled quite a lot on that, and I know Gwydion, who sits in the Finance Committee, has highlighted and very keen that whatever we do as a revised policy for the ICS, that it has environmental concerns highlighted in it, so i.e. the use of electric cars and electric car charging points. That's it for me. Linda?
Thank you, Suzanne. So in terms of the finance report, which we're presenting today, I'd just like to say this report has been discussed at the Executive Committee and with a number of the lay members. And of course, we currently do a very detailed report to the Finance Committee, which Suzanne chairs. So the key points to note are that for the period to the end of August, we have a year-to-date surplus of £300,000 after the receipt of the monies for the hospital discharge programme and vaccinations. And the forecast to the end of September is that the CCG is forecasting a break-even position. As we know, this does include some unidentified QIP, and it's 3.8 million unidentified QIP included in the break-even position. However, CCGs are working in collaboration with across Cheshire and Mersey with the other CCGs, and we are together trying to get to an aggregated break-even position across Cheshire and Mersey and for each CCG. And to that end, since the end of August, we have received an additional allocation of 3.8 million, which has covered our unidentified QIP and allowed us to actually deliver a break-even position at the end of September 2021, which is great. So we are also delivering against our running cost targets, which are for the first 6 months of the year. We're also predicting to meet the mental health investment standard for the year, and we are meeting the Better Payment Practice Code. The key risks that the CCG face in terms of finances and relating to the next 6 months are the increased cost of healthcare due to the impacts of COVID-19, the lack of guidance for the second half of the year, although this has now been received. It was received on the 30th of September, and we are working across Cheshire and Mersey to review that guidance and produce budgets for the second half of the year, otherwise known as H2. And also the third risk is the potential lack of financial control due to the changing the governance arrangements during the transition to the ICS. And we also need to ensure that while we're carrying on with the governance and making decisions, that we ensure we have a strong clinical and lay involvement in the decisions that we are making. That was all I wanted to say about the finance paper. Shall we take questions on that, please? I'm sure Suzanne will help.
Thank you. At present, we don't have any questions, but we'll pause a little bit. It does sound like a very positive outlook financially for us with that additional allocation, which is good.
Which is good, yeah. I think it's really positive that we are working so closely together in terms of finances across the CCGs in Cheshire and Mersey. So, so if I move on to the second paper, while we're in the middle of planning, as I think Neil has noted previously, we're sort of in the first month of the second half of the year, and we remain without a budget because we don't have an agreed financial plan. The financial plan should be agreed sometime in the middle of November. And in order for the CCG to be able to carry on its business as usual, we need to agree an interim budget. So we have presented here an interim budget based on the first half of the year. This paper has been reviewed by the Finance Committee, and as we've already noted, they have supported the adoption of this budget for the second half of the year until we get a plan for the second half of the year. At that point, when we've got some firm figures, we will have to bring that back to the governing body for that to be agreed again. So we're asking that the governing body support our position to produce an interim budget for H2 based on the first half of the year, H1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fiona, do you want to come in with a question?
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, it seemed to be a bit of a pain today, but hey. So my question is, just as I'm thinking about you talking about that, and it's really positive that however we've managed it and that we've reached a financial break-even position, that's great. When we get to the joint Cheshire and Mersey situation in 6 months or so, will all the other CCGs be bringing a break-even position, or will we be taking on some of their debt, and will that impact on some of the care that can then be provided to the people of Cheshire?
Oh, that's a very, very complicated discussion, to be honest, Fiona. In terms of Cheshire and Mersey overall, I think there is an overall underlying deficit across the whole of Cheshire and Mersey. But the ICS will have powers to decide how those monies are allocated across Cheshire and Mersey. So at the moment, I think it's not clear where the deficits may fall and how the financial flows within the ICS will work. There is guidance, and there is constant guidance coming out about that, and then that will be up to the ICS as to how they manage their finances going forward.
Thank you, Linda. I think Fiona looks content. Leslie.
Yeah, it's just a question. Obviously, we've had a lot of funding allocated through COVID funds this year, which I assume will not be continuing in the future. And how I was wondering, obviously, we'll be moving to an ICS at that point, and the ICB will, I suppose, be monitoring things. How do you think that's going to impact moving forwards? Are we going to see that we will have a deficit because we won't have that ongoing funding in place?
So that will impact across the whole of the NHS. And as we sit here, we don't really know the details of that. There are lots of different interacting things as well in terms of, the increased costs, the changes in the IPC. Then there's the waiting lists and the elective care and how we will recover that. So there are loads of, I think, interacting things which will impact on how the money is devolved across the system. So it's difficult to say. On top of that, obviously we're taking on board a population health management approach, which also we need to consider access to ensure the access across Cheshire and Mersey to healthcare is maintained and is consistent. So I think there are lots of interacting things that are going to make that not a simple answer. So I think it's going to be a complicated decision for the future ICS. Does that answer your question? It doesn't answer your question, I know. I think there are so many levels of uncertainty with all this. It's quite.
I think probably the answer is that there are a lot of questions that can't be answered.
Sorry, Andy. I was just concerned that we perhaps don't have that plan in place because we are moving forwards to something else, and this could be a huge issue. It's likely to be a huge issue running forwards in the future. So yeah. There
will be a planning exercise for 22-23, which will start soon, hopefully, and probably no later than January, I would expect the planning for 22-23, and they may take that into sort of a 2 or 3 year plan as well.
And I think this is, Leslie, is what we're going to see. This is part of the tradition, the transition. This is part of coming together as a joint committee to allow a transition to an ICB, so that you aggregate a position which is visible to all at a Cheshire and Mersey level, and that then can be transitioned to the ICB. So I think things that the governing body have supported in terms of that delegation and delegation to place, that transition, it is important for those reasons that you raise, and that does need to be visible, understood and planned for at a Cheshire and Mersey level, as well then as a place level, which is actually where things will change in order to shift things, but it needs to be understood at a Cheshire and Mersey level, because that is where the accountability and footprint will be. Thank you very much. I can't see any further questions. Unless there is anything which is burning, we'll move forward to the recommendations, which is that we're asked to note the committee's activities since the governing body meeting, note the particular issues outlined in section 3 and the monthly finance update on page 119, consider the recommendations made by the committee as outlined in section 4, and to approve the interim budget for months 7 to 12. Are we content to do all of those things, in particular the approve? I'm seeing some nods. I'm not seeing any problems with that, and nobody's typed anything in, so we will take that as agreed. Thank you very much. That moves us to section 5.3, which is the report of the committee chair of the Cheshire and Merseyside CCGs. It's on page 131 of your pack, which has got myself and Matthew down for it. I'm going to suggest that colleagues will have read the report and go straight to any questions, and then ask Matthew if he wants to summarise anything at the end. So are there any questions on the report of the joint committee that's presented to you? I don't think there are. So Matthew, do you want to summarise and close that?
Thank you, Andrew. Unexpected, but thank you. I don't suppose there's too much that I can add to it, other than, you know, the agenda keeps to evolve, doesn't it, as a joint committee, and will evolve even when more delegated authority comes to it. So again, as a reminder in the paper, the next meeting is on Tuesday. It does pick up on some of the conversation just then around Cheshire Merseyside finance as well as performance. And again, just a reminder, it is a meeting held in public, so you know people can observe those discussions that are going on, and equally with representatives from the CC on there, but by all means discuss with them either the papers that are being presented next week, but also if there are questions that we would like to raise as a governing body into that, equally recognising it's not just us being as representatives there, we are Cheshire and Merseyside. So if there's anything that's not been answered today which you feel is pertinent for next week, I'm sure Andrew or Peter or Claire will be able to discuss or raise where appropriate next week.
Thank you. And I'm taking and hoping that colleagues have had those papers. If not, we'll get them distributed to you.
They will be distributed. They got published yesterday.
Okay, if we can send those around, that would be really helpful. Thank you. We are asked to note the discussions and decisions taken at the joint committee, which I'm sure we have done. That moves us to section 6.1, which is the forward planner on page 146. This is for your information and comment. I'll pause. This is the item where Peter normally has some point of clarification, but on this occasion I don't think he does. Lovely, thank you. As is for your noting. Take us to any other formal business, and there hasn't been a request as we've gone forward, which does seem timely and important, particularly in the meeting which has been largely focused on governance, that we might invite the Director of Public Health, and Matt has had to leave us, to say a little bit word about the present COVID situation. And Ian, I know you weren't prepared for this, but are you in a position to say a little bit in terms of an update for that?
Absolutely, yeah. To be fair, I was there's a lot covered, so it was great to have a little bit towards the end of the governing body. I think From the Chair's update and all the AO update, you're well briefed on some of the challenges going on, but from my perspective, it is incredibly busy, both in Cheshire. I know Matt's not here, so I can't speak directly for Cheshire East, but we do work extremely closely. Cheshire East rates are highest than they've ever seen. It's 7-day infection rates, which says that, you know, significantly a lot. For Cheshire West and Chester, our rates, we had the Health and Wellbeing Board yesterday where we discussed a bit of an update there. Our rates hit a peak around 625 per 100,000 in January time, and we're now at around about 535 per 100,000, which gives you some relevant, very different places. Amazing, like, roll out the vaccine. You're well versed on all of that, and how busy that our primary care colleagues and help them roll out the booster and the pharmacies, but also our school age immunisation services working in tandem. So we've mixed starts to some of that programme. We've got really well progress in Cheshire West and Chester, and we hope that continues to get uptake on that. There was notifications, I think, from the Secretary of State yesterday about invites going to parents, etc., with regards to uptake in other areas. So that'll be all on the national booking system and local communications to go out. So we just encourage everybody to, if you've not had your vaccine already, to go and get that. There are many different opportunities, but also to consider the benefits of that for the healthy 12 to 15-year-old population. I referenced that because we are fast approaching half term. So I wrote out to our schools yesterday advising some additional measures that we'd like to see being put in and recommended, including daily contact testing for siblings, of household cases moving back, and trying to get that in place, make sure people get access to those lateral flow tests as well. I know our colleagues in Cheshire East were also making sure that we reinforce the importance of, you know, face coverings as well, which we'll be doing, because I think we'd all see that sometimes, sadly, we're in the minority when we go into some of those places in businesses, supermarkets, etc. So we think it's really important to continue doing those basics, and hand washing as other nasty bugs knock around and knock us all for six, really. I would say our outbreak teams are incredibly busy dealing with that. I think for those who have friends and colleagues in schools, I'm sure they are very much welcoming the half term as well, really. So we're trying to work with all our partners and we continue to go on to that. That all has knock-on effects, as what we're saying outside what I said yesterday, because that impacts on your health services, that impacts on our staff, business disruption, and so as well as, I mean, thankfully we are still seeing people in our hospitals, but thankfully not to the same levels that we have experienced earlier in the year, and it just without doubt shows the benefits of the vaccine programme. So we'll continue to push that, welcome everyone's support on it, but it is incredibly busy. That's against the backdrop as well as the public health system reforms that I think have probably come into place since we last met, and the development of the UK Health Security Agency, and then linked into the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities. Leaning on to that, just because we were talking a little bit about inequalities before, and we actually know that obviously COVID has exacerbated that and put a spotlight on those who have more challenges in their lives and impacted on them greatly. In Cheshire West and Cheshire East, we'll be doing some marmot workshops as well, being factored in, working with our health colleagues about the importance of the wider determinants, some of those indicators that need to be taken account for on impact on health. We've done our own health inequalities sessions. I would say we really need to focus on the financial impact and rural proofing. So as we talk about a system in Cheshire and Merseyside, delivering services and making sure that we have the right healthcare economy for clinicians and attracting people makes a big difference, doesn't it, with regards to health outcomes? And we need to be able to really quantify some of that and explain how hard it is to deliver these services in a much bigger urban rural environment. So I'm keen for us to look at some of that as well, really. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of, I'm not happy to take any other questions. I think what you're seeing is just from the sub-region in Cheshire and West and East and other parts of Cheshire, we are seeing a higher increase to other areas. We are getting good test uptake rates as well, so people are still going to get tested, which is really important. But it is, yeah, we are above the national average on all of that.
Thank you very much, Ian. That's very helpful, and I think important that perhaps we have that towards the end of our meeting, which has had quite a governance focus to it, to bring us to reality of what we're dealing with day to day. Thank you. I don't think you have any questions for that, but thank you for that update. It was important. My apologies that we are closing the meeting a little late. I thank you for all of your contributions to the meeting, and I think perhaps we'll just close with that little bit about COVID. Perhaps what I said at the start, that we are not helpless against this virus, and the rise in cases is not inevitable. Washing your hands, wearing masks, allowing space, ensuring ventilation, and getting vaccinated all work against this virus. And I think, you know, this is a collective effort to keep numbers as low as they can be. Thank you very much again for your contribution, and we will see you at the next governing body meeting. Thank you.